welcome back to Chapter 15, the Autonomic Nervous System and the Endocrine System. I believe this is new material for our next exam, so let's get started. First things first, a bit of a question. What would you do? When attacked by a bear standing on a cliff, do you jump, fight, or try to talk reason into the animal? And frankly, the answer is not important here. Okay? The question becomes, what is happening physiologically to this fellow, to this person, standing on this ledge? Heart rate, elevated. Blood pressure, up. Palms, sweating. Pupils, dilated. These are all very predictable events of an emergency, scary, frightening situation. What we're really dealing with here, folks, is the visceral motor division of your nervous system. Now, I've said to you before, and I'll say it again, this is a very important chart. I'm just going to run you through it real quick one time, just so you are with me as I go through the rest of this. We have a central nervous system made of the brain and spinal cord, which we've already talked about. We have sensory divisions, being somatic sensory and visceral sensory. The somatic sensory division is going to be anything that you can feel, touch, like you're aware of. Somatic sensory signals from skin, muscles, joints. Special senses I can see, I can touch, I can hear, I can taste. These are all somatic sensory. Visceral sensory, viscera means organs. The visceral sensory division is picking up information from your internal organs. Like, what's happening with your blood chemistry? Do you have oxygen deprivation that makes you need to breathe? Like, these are all situations where the visceral sensory division function. We're not particularly aware of the visceral side of things. And it's the same story over here. So the motor division is doing things, sensory is perceiving, motor is doing. Okay? In the motor division, there's a somatic motor division. The only thing we are capable of consciously controlling is the muscles, the skeletal muscles. So I think about picking up this pen, and I can pick up the pen. Everything else falls into the purview of the visceral motor division. The visceral motor division, seen here, is what we commonly call the autonomic nervous system. Right, the autonomic nervous system. And it's broken down into two parts because it's very complex. These are the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. We think of the sympathetic division as being a fight or flight reaction, and the parasympathetic division as being rest and digest. Rest and digest. All right, autonomic. Autonomic means self-governing. It is fully independent. The autonomic nervous system governs all of our fundamental states and life processes. Heart rate, blood pressure, body temperature, etc. Drives of hunger, all of it is governed by the autonomic nervous system. Anything that we call homeostatic, any homeostatic function, blood sugar levels, any of it, it's all falling under the autonomic nervous system. Again, do you think about your blood's chemistry all the time? Are you thinking, my blood calcium levels are low, I better go... No, you can't. You're not aware of it. You're not aware of it. This is happening behind the scenes. All right, general properties of the autonomic nervous system. This is a motor nervous system. It gives outputs. It is involuntary. Involuntary versus voluntary, right? Voluntary means I control it. Involuntary means I cannot control it. This is happening behind the scenes, and we are not directly aware. Again, a visceral motor system. This is the autonomic nervous system. The primary organs of this are indeed our viscera. This is going to be the organs and organ systems. I mean, it really does break down. Everything from your blood vessels to your sweat glands, rectopili muscles that make your hair stand up, your heart, your stomach, your intestines. These are all the organs, the viscera, or the organs of the autonomic nervous system. Now, this is a very, very important point to be made. Your visceral effectors, the organs and things that this works on, do not depend on the autonomic nervous system to work. They don't require it. Your heart will beat without influences from the autonomic nervous system. It reminds me of these old commercials. I might try to find one here in a little while for you. These old commercials from the 90s. It's called this company called BASF. And the way the commercials would go is it'd be like, BASF. We don't make the surfboard. we make it sleeker. BASF, we don't make the paint, we make it stronger. Then it will go BASF, a chemical corporation. And I mean, these commercials are everywhere, even Sunday morning cartoons, man. The idea is that the autonomic nervous system doesn't make things happen, it augments the way that they happen. So your heart can beat without the autonomic nervous system. But the autonomic nervous system is what speeds it up when you need more blood flow or slows it down when you're relaxing. Alright? Your intestinal tract will move things without your autonomic nervous system. But your autonomic nervous system can slow things down or speed things up, requiring, or depending upon what's required, I should say. So these are all very important concepts. Alright, here's a quick example. This is a baroreceptor example dealing with heart rate and blood pressure. I hope that's what this is. Regardless, let me just explain to you how this works. Alright, so you have receptors called baroreceptors in your major blood vessels. Okay? And what they will do is they sense stretch. So every time your heart beats, it makes your blood vessels pulse a little bit. Okay? Your big arteries, arterioles, they pulse. Every time your heart beats, they pulse. And if they pulse a lot, if you're pulsing a lot, your autonomic nervous system has these baroreceptors that pick up that there's too much stretch in your blood vessels. Let me say it again. You have baroreceptors. They pick up that there's too much stretch in your blood vessels. They're like, oh, this is how we sense blood pressure. Blood pressure is too high. What are we going to do about it? So what they do is they send an afferent message up to the brain. The brain processes this. Blood pressure is too high. Sends an efferent message back down to the heart. And what it will do is it will slow the heart rate. By slowing the heart rate, it reduces overall pressure, and you're back into homeostatic balance. It's a negative feedback loop. Too much pressure? Take steps to bring it back down. Same story with the eyes. You do the exact same thing. If you walk out in the bright sunlight, there's too much light coming in, so your pupils will constrict. Negative feedback. Your bladder does something similar as well. The bladder fills, the bladder empties. The bladder fills, the bladder empties. And I'll show you how that works over time also. It's all autonomic, believe it or not. It's all autonomic. Yeah, alright, key points. Autonomic, involuntary, regulatory. That is how this works. Alright, divisions of the autonomic nervous system. So what we have here is the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. Sympathetic and parasympathetic division. And what you need to think about is this. First comment. These two are constantly working together to keep you homeostatically balanced. They work with one another, okay? These are cooperative and dynamic effects. These are working together to keep you in homeostatic balance. Now, the sympathetic division, which works with the parasympathetic, the sympathetic division is normally responsible for, like, bringing things up, okay? Preparing the body for action. When you exercise, there's trauma, arousal, competition, anger, fear. This is like that fight or flight, prep the body for action, emergency situation type thing. So we can increase the heart rate, increase blood pressure, augment airflow. We can actually make the lungs more capable of bringing in and releasing gases. Blood glucose levels rise so that there's plenty of glucose flowing around the blood to make ATP. We reduce blood flow to the skin. The idea is if you're in an emergency situation, you want to reduce the blood flow to the skin so that you, if you're cut, you lose less blood. This is a real fight or flight thing. That's why if you get really, really nervous, what do people say if you get nervous about something? They say you get cold feet, right? Your hands will get cold too. You'll notice it. This is because you're reducing blood flow to the skin surface. That is a sympathetic nervous system reaction. Now, the blood from, like, the digestive tract, so you basically shut down the digestive tract in a really strong fight-or-flight reaction, and that's very simple to understand. The idea is that you don't care about processing food you just ate if you're running away from a tiger, and you might be food soon also, okay? So you shut down everything that's unnecessary, put more blood flow into the muscles in the brain so that you can think and run away or fight or do whatever it is you got to do. That is the sympathetic division of your autonomic nervous system. Parasympathetic, rest and digest. Okay? Calm the body. Reduce energetic expenditures. Assist in bodily maintenance. Increase motility in the gastrointestinal tract. Facilitate the stomach to process food. You rest, you digest. All right, you go and you eat that big meal, and the person comes around and says, "Okay, can I get you anything else?" And you're like, "A cot, a bed, somewhere I can lay down." Like you feel all just tired and done. That is the parasympathetic nervous system calming the body to increase gastric motility and function, so that you can digest food more easily. Yeah, factual. Let's see, what else do I want to say here? Yeah, really, I feel like that's pretty good. Now, let me say the following. These systems are constantly working together. Stomach, stomach. Heart, heart. Lungs, lungs. Eyes, eyes. Okay, they're constantly working together. Like, at this moment, your heart rate, as you sit here and listen to this, is probably pretty low. And if somebody were to knock on your door and you had to pop up and go in there, your heart rate would go up. That is your autonomic nervous system regulating your heart rate. It's not always one extreme or the other extreme. Normally they're constantly working together to keep things just right. Okay, keep things just right. It's not always fight or flight or rest and digest. These are constantly working together to keep you in homeostatic balance. This is called dual innervation. Most organs, most viscera receive nerve fibers from both divisions of this. And sometimes they don't innervate everything equally. Some parts of your body are primarily controlled by one or the other. For instance, your digestive tract is primarily regulated by your parasympathetic nervous system, whereas your heart is primarily regulated by your sympathetic nervous system. Yeah, okay. Now, in terms of dual innervation, this is further broken down into what are called antagonistic effects and cooperative effects. Antagonistic effects are where the parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions work against one another. Like one raises heart rate, one lowers heart rate. And then cooperative effects is where they work together to produce a single effect, a single unified effect. And I've got examples of this. So antagonistic effects, believe it or not, the pupils of your eyes have two layers of muscle. A central circular layer controlled by this parasympathetic division, and then an outer layer for this radial muscle that is controlled by the sympathetic division. So the sympathetic division, when you're angry or scared or what have you, and we're back. Turns out the battery on my camera has a shelf life. So one more thing we learn along this way. So let's continue with where we were. I was talking about antagonistic effects and cooperative effects. Your eyes are a good example of an antagonistic effect. Here you have muscle that contracts via parasympathetic activity to constrict the pupil, and muscle that constricts via sympathetic activity to expand or dilate the pupil. So in other words, they're working against one another. The parasympathetic division of your nervous system constricts the pupil, whereas the sympathetic division of your nervous system enlarges or dilates the pupil. So a classic antagonistic effect working in opposite of one another. As opposed to cooperative effects, and let me rephrase, there's all sorts of antagonistic effects. They are far more prevalent. Heart rate, so the parasympathetic nervous system keeps the heart rate at a low normal level, whereas the sympathetic division of your autonomic nervous system raises heart rate to speed it up, so they work against one another. This is very typical. Cooperative effects. This is where we work together towards some common goal. A good example of that is salivary activity. So your parasympathetic division releases a very serious salivary secretion when you eat, whereas the sympathetic division releases the more mucosal salivary secretion when you eat or drink. So you have at some stage drank or eaten something and notice like a gooey substance form in your mouth. That's this mucosal sympathetic secretion from your autonomic nervous system. Yes. Okay. Perfect. That'll work. And then it's worthy to talk about tone and tonal mechanisms. So you know that your skeletal muscles display tone. So you have a certain amount of muscle activity happening all the time in your musculature to keep your muscles ready to do work. So your biceps, your forearms, your hands, all of your muscles display some small amount of tone, which keeps them functional and ready to work. Your autonomic nervous system does this as well. So your autonomic nervous system is constantly releasing tonal messages. A good example of this is on your blood vessels. The autonomic tone on your blood vessels keeps them at a certain level of constriction, which basically regulates your your blood pressure. Regulates your blood pressure. So if you increase the amount of tone, the blood vessels will constrict and your blood pressure will go up. And if you decrease the amount of tone, your blood vessels will dilate and your blood pressure will go down. And we use this for all sorts of different functions. Like if you cut yourself, you'll notice that it will bleed for a period of time. It'll bleed less and less and less and less and then stop. One of the reasons for this is that this tonal mechanism is going to be used to constrict those blood vessels and prevent blood loss in areas of damage. Yeah, that's a fact. We also use this for regulating glandular secretions. So if you want to increase the amount of fluid produced, like in cerebrospinal fluid or aqueous humor in the eye, or what have you, any glandular secretion, what we tend to do is we'll use autonomic tone to constrict flow downstream of the gland. So blood pumps into the gland and it really balloons that gland, and it makes it very, very active. If you want to decrease the activity of a gland, you constrict the blood vessels before they get to the gland. That means that there's less flow going into the gland, and you decrease the function of that gland overall. Yeah. And then there are some unique roles of the sympathetic division. So the sympathetic division just does more than the parasympathetic division does. There's a lot more happening here. Your sympathetic division controls, it entirely regulates, your sympathetic division entirely regulates your thermoregulatory response. Basically, your sympathetic nervous system controls vasoconstriction and vasodilation. Okay, by sending lots of sympathetic messages to a blood vessel, you constrict that vessel. And by sending fewer sympathetic messages to a blood vessel, you dilate that vessel. That's how it controls it via tonal mechanisms. And because your sympathetic division of your nervous system controls vasoconstriction and vasodilation, that basically means that it controls your thermoregulatory response. So if you get too hot, you tend to vasodilate the blood vessels that go to your skin surface. That activates your sweat glands, and that just sends heat out to the surface of your body to radiate off. And if you get cold, you vasoconstrict the blood vessels going to your skin and keep all the blood in the core of your body. This basically means that the sympathetic division controls thermoregulation. Your sympathetic nervous system also controls the release of renin from your kidneys, which basically regulates your blood pressure hormonally by the amount of fluid found there. And it has various metabolic effects. So what is fascinating from my perspective is that the sympathetic division has the capacity to sort of rouse all of your body's functionality to greater speed. It reminds me of my Prius. So my Prius has these three buttons on the dash: electric mode, eco mode, and power mode. And eco mode and power mode, they don't really do anything different from one another. But the power mode makes it to where anytime you touch the gas pedal, it just floors it. Alright? You can have it in eco mode and just put your foot down to the floor and floor it everywhere you go. That's just like having it in power mode. It's no different. Your muscles can do this too. So when the sympathetic nervous system is in control, your muscles are in a state of what we call recruitment synchronicity. Let me say this again. Your muscles will be in a state of recruitment synchronicity. Recruitment synchronicity. What happens here is fascinating. So your muscles are placed on a hair trigger. In essence, normally if I want to lift something very heavy, I'll grab it and I'll lift and I'm recruiting, and then I can lift that thing up. When you're in a sympathetic nervous system response and you're in recruitment synchronicity, the moment I activate my muscle, the whole thing fires. All of it. Every single muscle fiber. They all work synchronously. They are recruited synchronously. The in together. That means together. The whole muscle flexes in unison. What this does is it gives you great bursts of strength, and your muscles make you move very, very quickly indeed, or with great power. But it can also have some downsides. So if you've ever seen someone try to speak publicly and it seems like they just can't get the words out. Either they're yelling at you or they can't get the words out. This is a very good example of a person having a sympathetic fight or flight response, and they can't regulate their diaphragm. So they can't deliver that smooth, honey smooth form of speaking that you're used to coming from someone speaking in public. They are either yelling at you or they can't get the words. They just can't make the words. It's a real problem in some cases. And it's kind of neat. Like, you can see people that have mastered this art, so to speak. My prediction is that someone that's incredibly fast, like Bruce Lee, probably has a good handle on their sympathetic division of their motor nervous system, aiding him in using recruitment synchronicity to speed up his muscle flexions, making him vastly faster than other people around him. Yeah. Alright, now controls of the autonomic nervous system, these are worthy. There are hypothalamic controls and there are cortical controls, but let me just make a statement to you, make sure I'm not moving that too fast here. The hypothalamus controls the autonomic nervous system. Let me say that one more time, just so we're very, very clear. The hypothalamus controls the autonomic nervous system. That's just a fact. Okay. So heart activity, blood pressure, body temperature, water balance, all of this, emotional stages, all of it is regulated by the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus runs the show. But that's not to say that there can't be other parts of the brain that have some degree of feedback. Like if you were to imagine this warhead candy here, and imagine putting that in your mouth and just like sloshing it around, getting all that sour stuff, you could almost feel your tongue burn. And the reason for that is because your cerebral cortex is influencing the functionality of your autonomic nervous system, making you salivate. I could sit here and make you think about a loved one that you had that you just cared so much about, and they were such wonderful people, and they are no longer with us. And I could make you feel sad. I may even be able to get a tear from you. That is cortical influence. Okay, cortical influence over the autonomic nervous system. When you stand up in front of a group of people to give a speech or something like that, and you feel nervous, those people are not going to attack you or do anything bad to you of any form. Bear with me.
I was in the zone.
Look, I'm in the middle of something. You gotta go do something else, okay? As I said, constant interruptions. Cortical influences. Okay, so powerful emotions. Any situation where you're very nervous, there's no reason for your autonomic nervous system to be freaking out. But it sometimes your brain gets ahead of your autonomic nervous system's regulatory concepts. You can even learn to control this to some degree, which is referred to commonly as biofeedback exercises. The classic example I've seen is where they hook people up to a heart monitor, and there's like a basketball game. Okay, the basketball will shoot towards the hoop, and if your blood pressure goes up, the ball rises, and if your blood pressure goes down, the ball drops, and you're trying to get it in the hoop. And after about an hour of playing the game, people learn to regulate their blood pressure pretty well. It's used for people that don't respond well to medications in some cases, so they can learn to regulate their heart rate if it starts going up too high through other means. It works. It works for migraines, stress, what have you. Alright, the limbic system. Now, it's important to point this out. The limbic system is the part of your brain that controls basic emotion, so the main emotional center of your brain. And because it completely, limbus means ring, because it wraps around the hypothalamus, like it's a ring around the hypothalamus, your emotions tend to have a strong influence over your autonomic function. And this becomes very obvious in some cases. You give a speech, or you have a big date, or a meeting or something, you feel very nervous. That nervous feeling, your heart's racing, your palms are sweating and cold. This is classic limbic system emotions overwhelming your hypothalamus and causing augmentations. Two major points to be made here are psychosomatic illnesses and vasovagal responses. Alright, vasovagal responses, let's do that first. So, if you are about to get bad news, what's someone likely to tell you to do? Sit down, I have something I have to tell you. And the reason they do this is so if you pass out, you don't hit the floor. Because sometimes your autonomic nervous system's like, or let me rephrase, your limbic system's like, oh, well that's bad news. Let's just take a time out. And it just turns your body off. Alright? You just pass out, you get up later and you deal with whatever it is you have to deal with. This is because your heart rate slows down, and your blood pressure drops, and your brain doesn't get enough oxygen, so you pass out. That is the limbic system causing all sorts of issues with your hypothalamus. Psychosomatic illnesses. I had a girl take my lab one time in anatomy and physiology. She said it was the best diet she's ever been on. Because every day her stomach was upset before class. She was so nervous about my quizzes. Alright? My quizzes are not that hard, one, but this is the body freaking out and leading to all sorts of medical conditions just because of stress or nerves or what have you. I used to work with a guy that was just a terrible human being. And every day before I went into work, I felt like I was going to throw up. That's a classic psychosomatic illness. Your hypothalamus is like, okay, I'm getting all these negative emotions. Let me give you a good excuse to avoid whatever it is that's triggering us. Psychosomatic illnesses. Alright, let's see, what else do I want to say here? So, hypertension, Raynaud's disease, and autonomic dysreflexia. So, hypertension is when your blood pressure is too high. This is obviously a homeostatic imbalance of the autonomic nervous system. Your baroreceptors are supposed to pick up when your blood pressure is too high and bring the pressure back down. Sometimes they don't. That's hypertension. Raynaud's disease is kind of fascinating, and I think that's the last one I'm going to do. We won't do autonomic dysreflexia. Raynaud's disease, this is classic Raynaud's disease. This is where there's undue vasoconstriction to the fingertips, so the fingertips get very little to no blood flow, and they begin to hurt quite badly. Okay, you can see where this is. What we tend to do in this case is give people broad spectrum vasodilators, and that alleviates the problem, but it leads to them having problems with free bleeding. So if they get a cut, or if they're injured or in a car wreck or something, they could bleed out and die, which is detrimental, obviously. And what I have seen recently is some folks that I know that, or one person in particular that I know had Raynaud's disease. She had a nitroglycerin salve that's normally used for people with heart disease. And she would rub it on her fingers, and it would cause the vasoconstriction to go away. Worked like a charm. So yeah, that is the autonomic nervous system. The idea here is it is autonomic. It is self-governing. It is regulatory. It's behind the scenes. It's controlled by the hypothalamus, but the cortex can have influence. All right, sounds good. Thanks. Okay, and we're back. So this is the second half of the lecture. This is the endocrine system. I just wanted to break those up to make it a little more bite-sized in its formats. So here we go. Let's roll. And here. All right, in humans, two systems, nervous and endocrine, aid in communication throughout the body, but they do it differently. All right, they do it differently. Your nervous system sends messages via axons, dendrites, nerve cell bodies, giving the capacity to send these messages all around the body electrically. Whereas your endocrine system communicates hormonally. That would be producing hormones that are released into the bloodstream and flow all around the body, triggering all sorts of responses. So they're both used for communication within the body, but they go about it in different ways. And that is the main goal of this lecture, is to understand that we go about it in different ways. All right, this chapter is about the endocrine system. The chemicals involved will be hormones. Hormones are made and transported, how they are done, how this is done, I should say. How they produce their effects on target cells. Target cells, that's a key point to be made here. Then we'll talk about some problems in which they are associated. All right, first things first. A comparison of endocrine glands and exocrine glands. And these are, in fact, quite different. Exocrine glands, exocrine, have nothing to do with the endocrine system. There are two types of glands in the body, endocrine and exocrine. Exocrine glands are considered ducted glands. What they'll do is they'll produce some sort of chemical or substance or what have you. Think about it like a sweat gland is an exocrine gland. It's going to make sweat. That sweat leaves via a duct and it's released externally, external secretions, released externally onto some sort of surface. Like your sweat glands produce sweat and it arrives on your skin surface. Your digestive glands, like your liver, for instance, can aid in producing certain digestive fluids that are released via a duct into the digestive system. That is an extracellular effect. They will release through a duct. That's the classic concept here. Now, endocrine glands are different. What they will do is the gland will produce some substance, a hormone. It will be released from the cell that produced it. It will go out into extracellular space where it stays until it eventually makes its way into the bloodstream. The idea is there is no duct. These are ductless, no duct. What will happen here is you produce a hormone, that hormone goes into the bloodstream, and it moves all around the body, Now, why doesn't a given hormone produce changes everywhere, all throughout the body? Because there will be what we call target cells. Very specific cells, these target cells, and this is very important, they have the appropriate receptor for the hormone. They have the appropriate receptor for the hormone. Think about when we did pregnancy a while back, and we talked about oxytocin. So oxytocin produced by via the pituitary gland, leading to uterine contractions. The reason it doesn't make your muscles contract randomly in your arms is because the receptors for oxytocin are found only on the uterus in this particular example. All right, so these are very specific target cells that are going to take a hormone from these endocrine glands. The endocrine glands produce the hormone, it's released into the bloodstream, flows all around the bloodstream, where it will then interact with very specific target cells which have the appropriate receptors, surface receptors, for that hormone. This is very important, target cells. Alright, now let's talk about general ways that one cell can communicate with another cell within the body. One-to-one, cells can communicate via gap junctions. So if I stimulate one smooth muscle cell, I tend to stimulate its adjacent smooth muscle cells because they're all interlinked via gap junctions. There are obviously neurotransmitters that are allowed to send messages throughout the body. So I can think flex bicep, and a message travels down an axon to my bicep, releases a neurotransmitter and stimulates that bicep to flex. Okay, that is a fact. And then, of course, there are hormones. Hormones produced by endocrine glands, which go into the bloodstream, flow all around the body until they reach their appropriate target cells. Target cells bearing the appropriate receptors for those hormones. All right. Yeah, we're making progress. Let's go here. So, overview of the endocrine system. You have various endocrine glands all around the body that serve for this role of producing hormones. But the thing is, you don't have a lot of endocrine glandular tissue. There's actually very little. Like if I could take my bicep out and weigh it, it would weigh a pound or two by itself, just a bicep. Or like like a big gluteal muscle or something like that. It's going to weigh a pound or two alone by itself. Turns out it would take 9 people to get 2 pounds of endocrine producing tissue. You have very little. Like up here on the heart, you got the thymus gland, you got this thyroid, parathyroids, your testes and ovaries. All of these have the ability to produce hormone, but the actual area within them that produces hormone is very small. Very small. So you just don't have a lot of tissue which physically produces hormones. Alright, now it's worthy to talk about a couple of other things here. There are prostaglandins, or what we call local hormones, that will only affect the local area around. So a good example of this are the chemicals that are found in your blood vessels. So the lining of your blood vessels contain prostaglandins, which when in contact with the blood will cause clotting. So imagine you've got like a blood vessel, and in the wall of it are these hormones which trigger blood clotting. The only time that's going to happen, the only time blood ever comes into contact with those hormones is when you cut the blood vessel open. Alright, so those are local hormones. They work locally, only in the area where they are stimulated. And then, of course, there are pheromonal effects. And we may have talked about pheromones in the past. I'm not entirely sure. I'll just mention the clinic effect because it's very straightforward. A large group of females that are confined to a space or around each other, think like a work group or a big family group, they tend to synchronize their menstrual cycles. And the only way that's at all possible is if one is capable of communicating body to body via aerosol. Okay, so there must be some method that humans are capable of communicating what we call pheromonally. This would be via an aerosol in the air around us, produced by our bodies, probably by our apocrine glands in our armpits, for example, and produce an aerosol that then allows us to communicate with people around us. So that's how that would work. All right, perfect. Alright, the point. How do you send messages from one part of the body to another? And the answer is with the nervous system and the endocrine system. So the nervous system is capable of picking up information via its dendrites, dealing with this in the axons, or the nerve cell body rather, and then conveying that message down the length of an axon to release a neurotransmitter. So these neurotransmitters released from the axon allow for communication. The endocrine system does the same thing. It uses a chemical, the endocrine system uses a chemical to allow for communication between one cell and the next. It just goes about it in a slightly different way. Instead of sending a message down an axon, the endocrine system will produce a hormone from one place or the other that will get into the bloodstream, flow through the bloodstream, and only hit very specific target cells. What makes these target cells, you ask? The receptors. It will have to have the appropriate receptors for those hormones. Alright, good. Let's go here. Alright, just 1 second, folks. And we're back. Alright, so comparison of the nervous system and the endocrine system. Alright, both of these, this is a very... I can foresee on your next lecture exam a comparison. A is nervous system, B is endocrine system. And I'll give you a list of things you have to say is it nervous or endocrine. So let's go through some of these. Both serve for internal communication. The nervous system does this electrically and chemically. In other words, it sends messages down the length of an axon, then it releases a neurotransmitter for allow for chemical communication. The endocrine system does so only chemically. The endocrine system's glands will release hormones. Those hormones communicate with adjacent cells and bring about a change via its target cells and their appropriate receptors. Speed and persistence of response. So the nervous system reacts very quickly. I think flex hand, my hand flexes. I think relax hand, and my hand immediately relaxes. My endocrine system reacts very slowly. The hormone levels must ramp up, and then it will relax very slowly as well. They have to ramp back down. Sometimes it takes weeks for a hormonal reaction to cease its entirety. So imagine that if I want to bring about an effect somewhere in the body, I have to produce a hormone. That hormone has to go into the bloodstream. It has to flow all around the body to get to its appropriate target cells and then stimulate those target cells. Then if I want to stop that reaction, I have to pump all that through the liver, and the liver has to slowly purify the blood of whatever chemicals are found there. So the speed and persistence of response is very different in the nervous system versus the endocrine system. I'm not terribly concerned with adaptation. Area of effect is worthy. The nervous system is very targeted. So if I think move finger, I can just move one finger. It's very specific. Whereas the endocrine system is widespread. If you release a hormone into the body, any cells that have the appropriate receptors are going to respond to that hormone. All right, they're going to respond. So it's very widespread. Okay, very general in its effect. Can affect many, many organs. All right, important point. These systems certainly regulate each other. The nervous system regulates the endocrine system and causes the release of hormones, and hormones regulate the nervous system and augment the way the nervous system works. So these are constantly working together with one another. Speaking of childbirth, so this is a good example of these two systems working with one another. What we have here is the head of this baby pushing against the cervix, which stimulates a nervous transmission which goes to the brain, causing the release of a hormone, oxytocin, which flows through the bloodstream back to the uterus and leads to uterine contractions. Those uterine contractions further squeezing the kid, pushing the kid against the cervix, which sends another nervous transmission to the brain, which causes more oxytocin, and it's cyclic until the child is born. So again, the idea is that these two systems regulate one another. They're constantly working together. They are homeostatic. Hormones are organs. Hormones, or what am I talking about? Jeez. Hormones and organs, that's what we're doing here. So hormones are mighty molecules is what I'm trying to say. So all of these are driven by hormonal influences. So your reproductive drive, it's entirely based on your ability to have testosterone and estrogen in your system. Without those, you don't even develop secondary sexual organs. Growth and development, so these are both based off of growth hormone in particular. So growth hormone drives the height you attain over time. I'm sure I've probably told you about this, but I'll tell you again. So there's a kid in my high school class, and he was very small for his age. You know, probably under 5 foot when we were in 7th grade, and his parents got a little nervous, and turns out he had a pituitary deficiency. He wasn't making appropriate amounts of growth hormone. So he started getting growth hormone shots, and the time we graduated, he was over 6 foot. So it worked like a charm. Boy, just shot right up. These hormones are incredibly powerful. Maintenance of water and nutrient balance. So you've got a hormone called antidiuretic hormone, and it regulates the amount of fluid that you keep in your body. And you realize this because you can take certain chemical drugs, let's say, and augment the way that they perform. In other words, if you've ever drank too much alcohol, you might notice that you have to go to the bathroom a lot. And the reason for this is because alcohol inhibits the activities of antidiuretic hormone, and it makes you become very dehydrated. So hormones regulate our water and nutrient balances. Regulation of cellular metabolism. So you can up your metabolism by releasing sympathetic nervous system hormones, like adrenaline, for example, epinephrine. Energy balance. So the way that you store energy, for instance, as sugars come into the body, we can store those as glycogen or store those as fat. That's going to be driven by insulin, okay, a very important energy balance hormone. Mobilization of body defense mechanisms are certainly hormones which drive the production of specific white blood cells. So this is all good factual stuff. Okay, let's go here. Hormones and their functions. So insulin, what insulin actually does is it alters membrane permeability of your cells, so your cells become more permeable to glucose in particular. So we have hormones that have the ability to augment the permeability of membranes. Some hormones stimulate the synthesis of enzymes or proteins, like prolactin, for example here. Prolactin is the hormone which stimulates for the production of milk in mammals. This is how this works. Inducing secretory activities, follicle-stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, FSH or LH. These are both going to be involved in production of egg and sperm. Okay, secreting those, as it were. Stimulus of mitosis, growth hormone, which I just talked about. Growth hormone stimulating the epiphyseal plates of your long bones. That's the growth plate. You have growth plates in your long bones when you're young. Growth hormone stimulates these to elongate and get larger, so that you attain height. And then, last but not least, activating or deactivating what's called a secondary messenger system, and this is very important. One of the reasons that hormones cycle in very low quantities is because they tend to activate enzyme amplification or a secondary messenger system. Okay, hormones are very, very potent. Just a little bit goes a long, long way, because what the hormone will often do is the hormone doesn't lead to a direct effect. The hormone stimulates the production of enzymes. Those enzymes come around and begin doing a job, and that job then results in a great effect. So the hormone is amplified by the activity of other things. So you require very low circulating quantities of these hormones to produce massive effects. Just a little bit of hormone can lead to piles and piles of glucose being mobilized into your bloodstream. So hormones go a long way. Just a little bit goes a long way is the idea here. Alright, target cell sensitivity. So target cells can become what we call upregulated, or target cells can become what we call downregulated. Upregulation means they become more sensitive. Downregulation means they become less sensitive. And the way this works is very simple. Let's say that you have a cell with very few receptors. But that cell really wants to pick up whatever it is it's looking for, so it begins to make more and more and more receptors and more receptors. So that anytime that hormone is in the system, those receptors are going to pick it up and lead to a big response. Alright? They produce more receptors, so they become more sensitive, and they're capable of picking up any stimulus far easier. That is upregulation. This is what the uterus does late in pregnancy for oxytocin. What's happening here is the uterus in the third trimester develops all of these receptors for oxytocin. It becomes upregulated. So when oxytocin starts being released from the brain, it leads to a big effect on the uterus. Right? A big effect on the uterus. Downregulation is the opposite of this. Downregulation makes the cells less sensitive to a given hormone. A good example of this is type 2 diabetes. A person, one good example here is dietary. So a person is consuming foods that are very high in sugar all the time. Their cells are just bathed in insulin. I mean, bathed in insulin all the time. So cells that were quite receptive to insulin begin to make fewer and fewer receptors as a response to this, and fewer receptors until they have so few receptors that the cells don't even really respond to the hormone anymore. That is classic downregulation. The cells become less sensitive to the hormone when it is in fact in the system. Alright, so let's change gears here a little bit and go through and talk about some examples. The pancreas. Okay, here's the pancreas. The pancreas serves a dual function. It's got endocrine cells. It has exocrine cells. The exocrine cells produce materials for digestion that go via a duct into the small intestine. The endocrine cells are called the pancreatic islets, or what I will call their real name, the islets of Langerhans. The islets of Langerhans. Now, the islets of Langerhans have two cell types: alpha cells, which produce glucagon, and beta cells, which produce insulin. This is very, very important. All right, insulin. Well, let's do this in sequence. Glucagon is going to be produced in between meals. So if you have been fasting for 5 or 6 hours, you haven't had anything to eat, your blood sugar levels will start to drop, and you'll release glucagon, which mobilizes sugar from your liver particularly, to go back into the bloodstream and keep your blood sugar levels at a resting rate. So your blood sugar levels should never really drop below about 70 milligrams per deciliter, because anytime your blood sugar levels begin to drop to that point, glucagon is released to bring your blood sugar levels back up. Insulin is the opposite. Let's say you have a brilliant idea to go to a donut place and eat a dozen donuts. It would be delicious, but your blood sugar levels are going to go up. But they really shouldn't go up anywhere up around like 120, 125, because you're going to release insulin, and insulin is going to bring your blood sugar levels back down to a resting state. All right, so glucagon raises blood sugar if your blood sugar is too low. Insulin decreases blood sugar levels if your blood sugar levels are too high. Okay, that's all spelled out here quite clearly. And when insulin is not working correctly, that's diabetes. Okay, that's diabetes. Now, diabetes is basically viewed as 3 related issues: polyuria, polydipsia, and polyphagia. Polyuria is when you make too much urine. So you're constantly going to the bathroom, you're producing a massive quantity all the time of a very, very dilute, watery urine. Polydipsia is an intense thirst. This is a response, okay? So if you're constantly going to the bathroom producing very dilute urine, you're going to be constantly losing water, and that makes you very thirsty. So that's this intense thirst. And polyphagia, this intense hunger, is piled in with this. So the side effect of all this is that you're constantly hungry as well. And what's the side effect of being constantly hungry and constantly thirsty in our modern world? You're probably... this will be like the 5th or 6th time I've tried to do this. I've run into battery issues and random hardware issues and even a memory card issue to finish up this lecture. All teething issues that we will have worked out by the time you see this again. But I'm going to try to do this one more time for you. And if it doesn't work this time, you just may not ever see this. So here we go. Let's see. Alright, so I'm just going to start here on what is diabetes. So, generally speaking, diabetes is an inability to control blood sugar levels, blood glucose levels. They're supposed to be around 70 milligrams per deciliter, but if they get up to, well, let me rephrase, it'll be about 70 at rest and about 110, 120 if you go and eat a dozen donuts, alright? But once it gets over 200, 250, 260, and then up north of that, you can run into major problems. And this leads to a whole host of symptoms. Some of the main ones from my perspective deal with the eyes and blindness. When you have that much sugar, the nerves start having problems with transmission. So this can lead to a lot of issues. And healing is very slow. Infections tend to be very, very dangerous. So yes, this is a major issue presented to almost 30 million Americans right now. Now, there are 2 forms of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 diabetes is 5 to 10% of cases. Type 2 diabetes is 90 to 95%. The vast majority are type 2, in other words. Type 1 is very rare. This is an autoimmune disease. The idea is that perhaps a virus causes some sort of interaction with the immune system, and the immune system is triggered to destroy the islets of Langerhans. An autoimmune disease, okay? This is where your own body's T cells, your immune cells, attack and destroy your pancreatic beta cells. Type 2 diabetes is what we call insulin-resistant diabetes. This is going to be a situation where the body is making insulin in most cases, but it's not doing what it's supposed to do. In our current situation, most of this is triggered environmentally, where there's just so much sugar in the diet, that insulin is constantly being produced, and the side effect of that is that you get target cells becoming non-sensitive. They are desensitized. They are down-regulated. They are less sensitive to insulin as a result of this environmental condition. Now, there are other things that can trigger this, but most of the times I'm going to say this is environmental. I'm not terribly concerned with Banting and Best. It's a good story, but we don't have the time. Alright, let's talk a little bit about growth hormone. So, growth hormone is what triggered you to grow taller when you were young. When you hit puberty, you started releasing lots of growth hormone, and it made you grow very, very fast. In most situations, like what you can see here, these 2 guys, one's just genetically tall, one's just not as genetically tall. This is Muggsy Bogues and Michael Jordan. They are totally normal looking. If you look at one instead of the other, like they look very, very normal. But the idea is one's genetically tall and one's genetically short. That is not what we're going to be dealing with these situations. When a person doesn't really produce growth hormone, they don't really grow taller. And this is called pituitary dwarfism, where too little growth hormones being produced at childhood, so they remain quite small in stature. Compared to gigantism, which is the opposite of this, this is where the body's producing so much growth hormone all throughout life that the person just grows taller and taller and taller and taller until they reach an astounding height, and they tend to die in their 30s in most cases. The heart just can't handle it. And then, of course, there's acromegaly. Acromegaly is a situation where the body starts to produce excessive amounts of growth hormone after bone plate closure, growth plate closure has already occurred. So if you look here, like, I've got this young girl, here she is as a teenager, and then here she is at 33. What's happened is that probably in her 20s she started producing excessive growth hormone, and it causes her jawline to extrude, her nose, called bigot gut, okay? Look at her forehead, and you can see here she is at 52, taking on the same basic physical features as this man here. The idea here is that this excessive growth hormone causes anywhere in the body that there's a lot of cartilage to grow out of control. Alright, I'm not terribly concerned with adrenals. I will mention androgens and estrogen. So, testosterone as an androgen promotes male secondary sexual characteristics, whereas females tend to have their secondary sexual characteristics driven by estrogen and progesterone. So the reason that we develop to look differently phenotypically during puberty is a response to these hormones. These hormones drive it. In fact, you can see it all the way back in utero. So in utero, one of these is male and one of these is female, and they look quite similar. What will drive the variation is the production in small quantities of these sex hormones. Okay, and I think that's really all I want to say, folks. Yeah, I'm pretty happy. So let's just call it there and see what happens on the next one. So I hope this finds you well, and have a good day.